Hey everybody, it's Mark Schultz here, and we are live today from East Fortune, Scotland in the UK. And let me just quickly tell you why I'm here. I'm here for the conference that's coming up the week after next, the Aircraft IT conference, where I'm helping a couple of different companies, supporting them and talking about digital and software in the industry. But because I was here, I just had to come by East Fortune, Scotland to the Museum of Flight, where they have one of the 7 remaining Concorde jets. And I'm going to do a walk around with you today. And we're going to talk a little bit about this Concorde jet. I just thought it'd be really interesting for you to learn something about it. And so I wanted you to follow me along. And this is a backdrop of the jet. But actually, as we get started, I'm just going to tell you that this is GB Oscar Alpha Alpha. So GBOAA, which is one of the remaining 7 Concorde jets that all of them are in museums today. And come with me as we're going to do a little walk around. We're actually going to go up into the airplane. We're going to go back down here and take a look at the airplane. And inside the hangar here, let me just tell you real quickly what they did is when they retired this airplane in 2003. Actually, it was retired in 2001, but it was brought here to the museum in 2003. They actually had to bring it down the river on a boat or on a barge and then bring it across to the field here where they put it into a hangar that they built for it. And now here it sits beautifully reconditioned for people to come to this Museum of Flight here and to be able to do a tour of it. So come with me and we're going to go up and restored. And we have the opportunity now to go up into it and do a little walkthrough. So come with me as we go up into the airplane and do a walkthrough. Here's one of the the stairways up into the airplane. And as you come up a little bit higher, you're going to start to get a good view. You're going to see really just how beautiful the design of it is and some of the features. But one of the things that I'm really impressed about is the design of the fuselage and the wing. And if we can pan over here for a minute and you just see how sleek the fuselage is and how aerodynamically onto this wing. It's just incredible how the engineers designed this wing. And it's very complex. It's a delta wing aircraft. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the features of it in a minute. But it really reminds me of So let's go up into the airplane here now. And first thing I'll just point out is that the doorway is pretty tight. And so if you're somebody who's 6 feet or higher here, you got to watch your head because the doorway you can see is below the height of my head. But once you get inside, it's actually quite comfortable. So come on inside the cabin with me. And first of all, we entered at the middle of the cabin, and you'll see behind is that the airplane is a single class cabin. Even though people had preferences where they would sit in the front or in the back, it's really a single class. And one of the things I was looking at to myself when I was looking at the airplane is it's really it's very similar to what you might. The cabin is actually quite small compared to the aircraft that we fly today, but it's it was quite luxurious for its time. And if you'll turn around this way with me for a minute and take a look at the forward part of the cabin. Used to say that you needed to plan into the restroom because they were so tight and so small. But the seats actually for its day in the 70s were very luxurious compared to some of the orange seats that we saw in some of the U.S. airplanes at the time that we used to fly in. And another interesting thing about the cabin here is you'll notice that if you've flown in a 787, you know how large the windows are. And the windows were very small. And in speaking with the engineers, and I read a little bit about this, is that they designed the windows smaller so that if they ever had rapid decompression in the airplane, that would be disastrous, of course. But they were trying to control the air flow and how much it would go out. I understand that they weren't small for structural reasons. They were small in order to be able to prevent, kind of rapid decompression. Another thing I learned in learning about the Concorde aircraft was that, when it travels at almost Mach 2 speeds, the exterior on the aircraft becomes very hot. And the fuselage actually expands as much as 6 inches in the cabin area. And so everything has to be designed so that it accommodates the expansion of the aircraft, the materials of the aircraft, during expansion. They did provide full service. It was typically considered to be a very, high class transportation. By the way, the transit time across the Atlantic, the fastest time ever, I think, was 2 hours and 52 minutes or 2 hours and 53 minutes. And so when we flew over from Charlotte to Dublin, it was just under 7 hours just to go from Charlotte to Dublin. And this airplane was able to transit in under 3 hours, which makes a pretty big difference because it takes 3 hours to go, pretty routinely just about anywhere in the U.S. And come on up, let's go up front here a little bit further. The aircraft would reach speeds of nearly Mach 2 and would fly at 55,000 feet, over 55,000 feet. And the pilots would say they could begin to see the curvature of the Earth, when they would be up at that kind of an altitude. So come with me further forward. We're stepping into the galley area right now, up into the galley, up toward the front door. And we had modern day digital equipment here for the communications for the PA system that existed, and very quite interesting. And come on up here further into the cockpit. I hope you'll be able to see this, because actually this is really, part of the favorite part of mine is being able to see the cockpit up here. We're going to go right up here. I'm going to see if I can get the camera up here a little bit closer for you so that you'll be able to see the cockpit. So we had a really tight cockpit here, but the pilots report that it was actually quite comfortable. So, you had a pilot and a co-pilot seat on the right, a pilot seat on the left. This was a 3-pilot aircraft that had a flight engineer seat, and then it had an extra seat over there for people that might have been transiting. And so we had a traditional cockpit here. There's no glass cockpit back in that time. Artificial horizons, compasses, airspeed indicators, air controls over on the right-hand side. And when we go out around it, I'm going to give you some information about the aircraft itself. So let's go ahead and do that so we can keep things moving, because I think it's really interesting on the outside of the airplane. But this airplane, sadly, you all know that it just that at Charleston, where there was about an 18-inch, I think it said 12 or 18-inch piece of metal that was on the runway. And the aircraft on takeoff ran over the metal and reported the tire was punctured, and then the metal went up and flipped and hit the underside, the left side of the wing, and punctured the fuel tank. And when it did that, the fuel began to leak, and then refurbished the aircraft. And they were going to turn the aircraft into a supersonic aircraft that would continue on, into the next century, into the 2000s. They spent, millions of dollars in redesigning the aircraft and reinforcing. They put Kevlar in the fuel tanks. They reinforced the electrical. And then, sadly, when they put the aircraft back into service in 2001, 9/11 struck, and then it became, not viable for it to operate anymore. There's other reasons why it didn't operate, and I'm going to talk about that when we go down to talk about the engines in the bottom. So let's go down to the bottom underneath the aircraft, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the interesting details of this aircraft. I just really like this aircraft, and I'll just tell you that the design was just so much ahead of its time, and just many of the features were advanced. The engineers were really forward-thinking. And as I'm kind of going down here, let's go back to the beginning and why they started trying to, build this airplane in the first place. Is that in the 1940s, there was a race to go supersonic. And, the UK, Britain, and the United States were both testing, and also Russia was at the time, testing supersonic aircraft and different ways to be able to fly supersonic aircraft. And it turned out that the Concorde was developed, during that time frame, and during an era when everybody was trying to figure out how to fly, faster than the speed of sound. And there was a lot of difficulties really in doing that, because engines can't operate under supersonic speeds. Traditional airfoils couldn't operate under supersonic speeds. And so they had to make a lot of different design changes in the airplane, really, in order to be able to accommodate supersonic flight. So let's just step underneath the aircraft for a minute and show you a few different things about it. First thing that we'll do is we'll take a look at the wing. Very interesting wing. You'll note that the wing is a delta wing. If we can get a picture underneath of the wing here, you'll see that the wing starts with a very long fairing in front of the wing and then sweeps back off into a delta wing, toward the back. This aircraft consumed a very large amount of fuel, and it consumed about 3 times as much fuel as what typical aircraft did, during that time. And in the fuselage itself, I think there's 3 fuel tanks, and then in the wings there's 10 fuel tanks, of which they had to constantly manage fuel transferring on the aircraft in order to be able to maintain weight and balance in different flight configurations. And so if we'll come back over here, let's take a look at the landing gear that we talked about, that is just massive as part of the gear. It's not as big as a 747 gear, of course, but we said that when the aircraft incident occurred, the tire had run over a piece of metal and punctured the tire, and then that metal came up underneath the wing somewhere and impacted the fuel tanks, and they had a leak and caused the fire, from the aircraft, which caused it to crash. Here we have an interesting design of the engines. This is a Rolls-Royce. The engine is a Rolls-Royce Olympus 593 is what the engine is. It's a very reliable supersonic engine. And the inlets are designed so that the inlets open and close in order to reduce the airflow going into the engine inlet, because the airflow into the engines has to be subsonic. It has to be below the speed of sound in order for it to be able to flow through the engines. So they use a series of baffles and openings on the front of the engine inlet to be able to slow the air down as it comes through. This engine was in thousands of hours, in supersonic flight, and was very reliable. A Rolls-Royce engine, we all know that they were very reliable engines. I'm here under the wing right now, and we're headed toward the back of the wing. And there's a few really interesting features that I want to point out to you about this aircraft. All right, there's no horizontal stabilizer back here, okay? And the reason for that is there's no elevators. The reason for that is because the delta wing uses it combines the ailerons into the elevator. And there's 3 is from these 3 aileron elevators that are on the trailing edge of the wing. This aircraft engine, the Rolls-Royce engine, extremely powerful engine, has a high-powered afterburner which is in it. And a unique feature about this engine is that it actually, when it goes into, when the afterburner comes on, I had a really interesting opportunity back in 1978. It was either late 78 or early 79. I was going to school at A&P school in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at Spartan School of Aeronautics, and landed down at Tulsa, Oklahoma airport. Requirements at the time for the 707 and some of those other aircraft. If you've ever stood at the airport and watched a 707 take off, for example, years gone by, they're quite loud. And the Concorde had a similar, kind of a decibel level, that was part of that. As we come back here, underneath the tail of the aircraft, another thing that I noted here is I noted also has a tail wheel back here. And, some aircraft, when they have center of gravity problems, I'm not saying this one did, but I note that that when they aren't careful about some aircraft, like the 737, for example, they end up getting tail strikes because they have a tail skid back there and they haven't had the aircraft loaded, or they over rotate. And this aircraft has a tail wheel in order to be able to prevent a tail strike back there. A couple of other interesting things we'll walk around and take a look at. I just want you to join me on this side of the wing and look at the underside of the wing, because I really, really am impressed with the design of the airfoil of this wing. It's just so impressive. If you come stand over here with me and take a look at the underside of the wing, you'll notice again the complex curvature of the wing and how it's designed to be very aerodynamic during both subsonic and supersonic flight. And then another feature of this wing is that as the aircraft proceeds into supersonic flight, there's a pressure cone that comes off of the tip of the aircraft, and they have to keep the wing tips inside of that cone in order to be able to maintain controllability of the aircraft. And so this aircraft is designed so that the tip of the wing stays within that pressure cone as it's into supersonic flight. So just a couple more quick things, and then we'll talk about a couple of the digital aspects of this airplane, okay? You know that I'm super excited about digital, and I'm trying to figure out how to continue to promote digital in the industry, which, by the way, I told you I'm going to the Aircraft IT conference the week after next, where we continue to try to promote digital, and there'll be vendors there who are showing their software and how we're continuing to try to support the industry with digital implementation, doing digital transformation and the implementation of digital within the aircraft industry. And one thing to note about this aircraft is when it was originally released, or when it was originally manufactured, the inlet doors on the engine actually were analog. So they were designed to measure the parameters of the conditions of the airflow going into the engine inlet. And through analog, sensors and things, the inlet was opened and closed in order to be able to calculate the optimum airflow going into the engine. But they decided they couldn't achieve the maximum thrust that they needed out of the engines. And so what they did was Rolls-Royce and British Aerospace together designed the inlets so that they could implement early computers in it. And so this was really one of the early implementations of computers into an airplane, where then they were able to optimize the airflow going into the inlets and for it to be more efficient and have better thrust. So from a digital standpoint, that's exciting to me, because we were implementing digital, into these airplanes, into the 60s and in that kind of a time frame. So just a couple more things about the airplane that we'll point out is, again, the underside of this wing is very sleek, and right above me, this is where the cargo was held. Now, it didn't have massive cargo compartments, but I understand that they did fly, bank notes and different things like that, back in the day, that needed to get across the ocean, at very high speeds. And then if we take a look at the nose of the airplane up here, the airplane has a very sleek nose. It achieved speeds of like 1,300, miles per hour. And the landing speed of the aircraft was roughly 185, miles per hour. And one of the things that was a unique feature of the Concorde was that because of the wing configuration, the delta wing configuration, you can imagine that to land, it had to have a very high angle of attack in order to be able to continue flying. That wing did. And so the result was the nose was very high, and the pilots actually couldn't see over it. And so the nose drooped 12 degrees down to allow the pilots to be able to see over the nose as the aircraft was landing. And then they would flare out and land on the runway, and then the nose would, come back up again. So that's our quick walk around, that I wanted to do today on the Concorde. I just thought you would find it interesting. And so I wanted to bring you with me in this walk around. I want to tell you again that the reason I'm here in the UK this week and next week is I'm going to the Aircraft IT conference in London. It's actually on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, June 7th, 8th, and 9th. And I wanted to invite you that if you're coming to that conference, that I'd like for you to stop by and see me. In the last year, I've visited with people and companies and airlines and MROs and software companies, nearly 700 of them. And I've gathered information about the optimum ways to implement digital and do digital transformation in supporting our industry. And I would really relish the opportunity to be able to have a conversation with you about what kind of digital you're trying to implement. Are you looking at implementing an MRO system, at digital task cards, at supply chain challenges and issues? Are you looking at trying to address production control? Are you looking at content management? What are the problems that you're trying to solve out there today so that we can make our industry more efficient? Later next week, I'm going to have a couple of other videos about some of the observations I've made in the industry and some of the challenges that all of us are faced with today. and what people are doing in order to be able to address those challenges, because we need to create efficiencies in the industry today in order for this industry to continue to be successful. Not unlike that engine inlet, all right, where they had to redesign the engine inlet so that it was more efficient and apply computerization to that engine inlet. We need to take a look at what we're doing and say it's not good enough. We need to re-implement technology and digital to be able to create successful optimization of our environments in order to remain competitive and to be able to be profitable and to be able to serve our industry well in the aviation industry. Thanks for watching me today, and I look forward to seeing you on our next broadcast that we do. Fair winds and following seas, and have a great day. I look forward to seeing you in London.